Hi everyone, this is a project by Ava, Jerry, Leidy, and Erinn. We did our project on community police relations, so we hope you enjoy this crunching of the data on community relations and police and how the data on those interactions. This presentation will investigate how the racial composition of an American community affects that community's perceptions of the police. Part of our investigation will look at how a community's perceptions of the police affect a community's relationship with the police. Community police relations have long been a contentious topic of passionate debate in our country. And policing practices have been adapted to foster better community police relations, especially within minority community. Despite these efforts, a strong mistrust of the police persists, particularly in minority communities. In this presentation, we want to look at the data that explains why this mistrust persists. The August 14th, 2014 shooting of an unarmed African-American teenager named Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and the April 19th, 2015 death of young African-American Freddie Gray while in police custody in Baltimore, Maryland, have brought community race relations to the forefront of the American political discourse. The above are just two higher profile instances of police use of force, which have exacerbated existing tensions between minorities and the police. These tensions have become manifested in public outcry for justice in policing practices, especially from among the African American community. Further, this perception of unjust and disproportionate use of force by police on young minority men has led to the increasing prominence of advocacy groups such as Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter movement's influence can no longer be ignored. The scope of the Black Lives Matter movement's influence has made the movement's agenda a paramount issue in the 2016 presidential campaign. The increasing demand for justice in policing and the prominence of groups such as Black Lives Matter illustrate the importance of community police relations for public administrators in America. Public administrators should understand the data behind the perception of unjust policing among minority communities. This presentation will observe the data behind these perceptions in order to consider how to best improve community police relations.
We believe that a major cause of the levels of distrust results from the consistent negative interactions that minorities face with the police. In order to analyze this concept, we will test the following questions. Does the number of negative interactions with police, dependent variable, vary among gender, age, and race, or independent variables? Do negative interactions with police lead to greater distrust in the police, or dependent variable? And does that vary among different age, gender, and race groups, or independent variables? Lastly, do young males of color have the greatest levels of distrust in police? Our data sets. Contacts between police and the public was published in 2008 and it was retrieved from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. This data set shows the Police Public Contact Survey and it presents findings from a national representative survey of nearly 60,000 residents ages 16 or older about their contact with police during the 12 months prior to the interview. Interviews were conducted between July 1, 2008 and December 31, 2008 as a supplement to the National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS. We also gathered Gallup polls. In U.S. Confidence in Police Lowest in 22 Years is a poll which compares confidence in police from 1993 and 2015 among different groups which include gender, age, and education level, as well as politic affiliation, among others. Results from this Gallup poll are based on telephone interviews conducted June 2nd to the 7th in 2015, with a random sample of 1,527 adults aged 18 and older, living all in the United States and the District of Columbia. For results based on the total sample of national adults, the margin of sampling errors is plus 3 percentage points at the 95% confidence interval. All reported margins of sampling error computed design effects for Wayne. The second Gallup poll is Blacks divided on whether police treat minorities fairly. This study explores the division in opinion among African Americans about whether police treat minorities, including Blacks, fairly or unfairly. On the other hand, according to this poll, whites are most likely to say police treat racial minorities fairly. Results from this Gallup poll are based on telephone interviews conducted June 15 through July 10, 2015, with a random sample of 2,296 adults aged 18 and older, living in all 50 U.S. states and the District of Columbia. All respondents have been previously interviewed in the Gallup Daily Tracking Survey and agreed to be reconnected by the Gallup. For results based on the total sample of national adults, the margin of sampling error is plus minus 5 percentage points at 95% confidence interval. The variables. The variables that we'll be using from the context between police and public include the number of face-to-face interactions with police, the reason for most recent contact, and whether police used or threatened to use force during the most recent arrest, whether the respondent feels police behaving properly, and the variables age, gender, and race. In the U.S. Confidence in Police Lowest in 22 Years Gallup report, the variables that we'll be looking at will be the level of confidence, which has been separated among percentage categories: great deal, quite a lot, some, very little, none, or no opinion, as well as other variables which include age, gender, race, and the change over the past 3 years. In the Blacks divided on whether police treat minorities fairly, the variables that we'll be looking at are fair and unfair treatment separated into percentage categories such as very fairly, fairly, unfairly, and very fairly race separated into non-Hispanic whites, Blacks, and Hispanics. Our hypotheses. We expect to find significant differences among age, gender, and ethnicity groups regarding trust levels in police. We expect to find a negative relationship between age and distrust. As age decreases, the level of police distrust increases. Our first hypothesis is that age groups of 21 and under are most likely to distrust police. We also expect to find a significant relationship among gender groups. We expect to find that there's a significant difference among levels of trust in police between males and females. We anticipate that distrust in police will be greater for males than it is for females. The last relationship we anticipate to explore is the relationship between race and the level of trust. Based on our previous review of literature, we expect to find a significant relationship among minority races and the level of distrust. Our analysis will allow us to determine if young males of color have higher levels of distrust. Lastly, we'll be looking at the relationship among all variables and identify possible causes in the levels of trust. Based on negative interactions with police, we expect trust levels to be lower in these subgroups. Our analytic plan. From the BJS dataset, contacts between police and the public, we'll be able to include the type of contact, and we'll break it down in order to ensure that we're analyzing the separate variables such as age, gender, and race. We use the chi-square test for independence, which will allow us to determine if the mentioned variables have a significant relationship. We will analyze each of these categories in order to determine if each of our hypotheses is supported or disproven. Then we will determine whether the negative interaction with police could be considered a cause for the low levels of trust in police. For this relationship, we will use varied association to determine if an association exists. The strength and pattern of direction of the association will also be evaluated. The data that we populated will allow us to determine if our hypotheses are accurate in regards to the differences among our age, gender, and ages, and it will also direct our recommendation for a resolution on the alarming issue our society is currently facing.
And now we're coming to the results section. Our first variable here is age. Our hypothesis is that younger people are more likely to have negative perception of police. As the data shows, young and older respondents show similarities in number of interactions with police, and also they interact with police for very similar reasons. Different, however, is their takeaway from these interactions, measured by the perception of improper or proper behavior by police. As the data shows, about 15% of those who are 29 years old or younger perceive police behavior as improper during their last interaction, whereas the number for those who are age 30 and older remains in the single digits. Our second variable we tested was gender. Here our hypothesis was that males are more likely to have negative perception of police than female. When looking at the data, we saw that male and female respondents show similarities in the number of interactions they have with police. Also, they interact with the police for similar reasons. However, slightly more men are stopped in traffic, while more female reach out to the police for reporting purposes compared to male. Different, however, is their takeaway from these interactions, again measured by the perception of proper or improper behavior by police. Female respondents only name in less than 10% of the cases that they perceived police behavior as improper, whereas male reported this perception in more than 10% of the cases. Our third variable was ethnicity. Here our hypothesis was that minority groups are more likely to have negative perception of police. Again, the data shows that majority and minority groups show similarities in the number of interactions with the police. We could thus conclude that the police is colorblind. While all groups mostly interact with police when being stopped in traffic, the importance of this category compared to other categories or reasons for interactions vary between the different groups. Again, different is their takeaway from the interactions, again measured by the perception of proper or improper behavior by police. Here the majority, whites, perceive in less than 10% of the cases the police behavior as improper, whereas minority groups perceive this in at least 13% of the cases as improper. Blacks rank highest here, with more than 14% of all cases perceived, of all interactions perceived as improper. In the last step, we tested if the results as shown did occur by chance only, or if there is a dependent relationship between them. That said, all variables were tested for the dependency-independency through a chi-squared test. As a result, all variables fall in the respective cortical region, thus they are unlikely to have occurred by chance only. We conclude that ethnicity, followed by age, then gender, play a role in determining the respondent's view of police.
Now that we're finished with the results portion of our memo, we'll move into the discussion portion where we recap the results of the hypothesis, and those three hypotheses ended up trending in the expected directions that we laid out in the early part of our report. And from least significant to greatest, we saw a higher distrust in younger generations than in older when it came to the police, a higher distrust in males than in females, and a higher distrust in minorities than in whites in dealing with the police. Additionally, to support our hypothesis and the findings of our data, we found a report from Gallup that also backs up the fact that the public is losing confidence in the police force. In fact, in this report, 52% of all respondents either had a great deal or quite a lot of respect or confidence in the police. And this number is actually, while it does represent more than 50%, it is actually at an all-time low. In addition, 18% of respondents lacked confidence in a police, and that was actually at an all-time high. And that 18% was a combination of either very little confidence or no confidence. Turning from the discussion to future policy options, there remains, in my opinion, three directions that we can take. One would be to leave the future policy options alone and basically to adopt the status quo, to leave the current situations in place, to do nothing, which in my opinion will get the same results. And in fact, maintaining those current policies will more than likely tend to influence the downward negative trend and will continue that downward negative trend in confidence in police interactions amongst the three groups that we studied in our data. The other option, in addition to status quo, is citizen review panels. And the citizen review panels could be set up to have oversight of the police department. How much authority they have could be determined by either the local politicians or the police chief. But what's important is the makeup of the panel and making sure that all the stakeholders who are concerned about the police and their interaction with citizens, to make sure they have a seat at the table. In particular, making sure that we have racial diversity in and among that panel. The third future policy option that could and probably should come about as a result of the findings of this report would be body cameras. And we know that it's something that's been talked about and discussed widely in the news. And we believe that based on the current policies and lack of transparency and accountability with the police department, we feel like this is something that would not only be supported by all the stakeholders, but would also assure the public and youth, minority, and males in particular that there's a recording of the interaction with the police department and therefore some history then that would encourage the police officer to respond appropriately, and likewise the police are supportive because they believe it would in fact in many cases exonerate them because they feel like their actions are being misrepresented. So in conclusion, I believe the status quo is not a legitimate option, that we should, as a result of this, take a serious look at the policies we have within the police department as to how they interact with citizens. We see that as a result of our data that not only is it trending negatively for younger generations, but also for males and more importantly for minorities. And we need to make sure that we make recommendations to the police department that ensure that they change these policies to reverse this negative trend and once again restore confidence in the police department.